What is up, guys? It's Doodoo Poker here, back for another video. Today we are going to be talking about a cool river donk concept that we can employ as the 3-bet pot out of position pre-flop caller. This is going to be versus a double barrel when we are on the river. So, let's say we have a hand like pocket eights, and we are in the cutoff. We decide to RFI. Our opponent, who is a reg, 3-bets on the button. A small blind and big blind fold, and we decide to call. The flop comes 10 of spades, 7 of hearts, 2 of spades. Nothing else to do with our eights but check, and our opponent fires out a 1/3 c-bet. Now we can raise or we can call, and this time we decide to call. On the turn, a 5 of diamonds comes. Now our opponent bets 75%, and we have, let's say, 8 of spades, 8 of diamonds. Now a solver's always calling here. But we have to think about rivers. Okay, so what rivers are we going to call, and what rivers are we going to fold? Well, let's take a river and find out. So we decide to call here, and a jack of spades comes. Now we know from theory that we get donking ranges on the jack of spades. And why is that? Well, if we go to the breakdown and we look at flushes, we have 14.7%. If we look at straights, we have 1.8, and sets, we have 14. Now let's see what the button has. The button has less flushes and has less sets. So they also have no straights. So we have an advantage on the sets, and we have an advantage on the flushes, and we have an advantage on the straights. So because of this nut advantage, we get to have a donking range. So we see our hand, 8 of spades, 8x, does not really get to donk. Instead, we use 9s. But let's think about what happens if our opponent jams. So let's say we're here and we have our 8s, and now our button does something that we don't really like. We see him go all in, and now we have 8 of spades, 8 of diamonds, and we know it's a 0 EV spot. We have to think, is this spot over or under bluffed? Well, let's take a look at some data. We see here from the data, field as 3-bet pot in position pre-flop raiser, cutoff versus button in the bet 30 bet line, that the aggregate is 29 weak. Now, if they bet 100, this should be 33, so they're actually under bluffing. If they bet 70, they're right in line with GTO, and if they bet 50, they are a little bit over bluffing. But we have to look at filters. So we know the aggregate is 29 weak. Let's go to river third to flush. We see on a two-tone flop it's 25, and on a rainbow flop it's 24. So this is a bad data point to call. So as an exploit, you want to fold all your 0 EV bluff catchers. So if you have 8s, if you have 9s, if you have 10-9, if you have 8-7, you should be pure folding these. The only way it would be a good call is if you have specific history with the villain. Population data says that these are pure folds. So let's try to think how we can do one better than just folding. Let's look at MDA for bet flop, bet turn, fold river from the button's perspective. So we see here, in the bet fold line, this is my opponent. So let's say he c-bet flop, he bets turn. Now me as the cutoff, donk jams. Let's see how often he folds. We see here that fold 100 should be 50%. It's 61 over big samples. 70 should be 41%. And 50 should be 33%. So we see them over folding between 10 and 15%. So what does that mean? What that means is if we know we can't call a triple barrel line with our 0 EV bluff catchers, what we should do on this run out is turn all of our 0 EV bluff catchers into bluffs ourselves. So what we do here is we take a hand like 10-9, we take a hand like 9s, so we take a hand like 8s and 8-7, and instead we jam them ourselves because we already know theory's doing it with 9s, but not doing it with 8s because of blocker minutia. What we should do is, let's say this is 100%, it's 97 in game. We see they're folding 51. But if we look at the data, we see them folding 61. So a lot of hands that a solver is going to call with are not going to happen in reality. Do you think a person always calls with a hand like king 10 off? Do you think a button always calls with a hand like ace 10 off with no spade? How about ace jack off with no spade? I don't think they're going to call with these types of hands. So we're going to get some folds that we normally wouldn't get in theory, and we get those in practice. Now, what happens if my opponent understands MDA? Well, if my opponent understands MDA, this is the field as the 3-bet pot out of position pre-flop caller and the check call donk line. What we see is if we go 100, it is under bluffed. Now, if we went 70, it's around GTO. But even if my opponent understands MDA, he's going to have a hard time calling with 0 EV bluff catchers because it's under bluffed in MDA. So we have two advantages. We have it's under bluffed in MDA, and we have it overfolded in the bet fold line. So we know we can't call hands like 8s, hands like 9s versus a jam on the flush complete river because it's under bluffed by about 5%. Instead, what we can do is turn a hand like 9s and pure donk jam, turn a hand like 8s and pure donk jam, and turn all of our 0 EV bluff catchers into pure donk jams and over-realize that way. So I thought this was a cool concept. It works out as well because we have the flush advantage, we have the set advantage, and we have the straight advantage. Our opponent is going to have a very hard time calling with a hand like ace-10 off with no spade, and just in general trying to find bluffs from our perspective. If you like this type of content, please give me a subscribe, please give me a like. There'll be a new video every single day, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.